I got seas going right across my deck here now. I did not right up in his vicinity, but no, I didn't. So this is just Roger. Thanks for that information, sir, and I'll get back to you if we come up with anything. Over.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Beyond the Breaker. Welcome to another episode of... Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Breakers, a podcast about shipwrecks, loss, and lessons learned from maritime disasters. My name's Tanner, and I will be one of your hosts today. I'll actually be joined by one of our returning champions, Jess. Jess, how is it going today?
It's going great. How are you?
I'm doing quite well. It is exam week for my students, so I don't have quite as much actual lesson planning to do. So it's a good week to do some pod notes and podcasting.
Most definitely.
Taylor cannot join us today. He's doing kids sports or recital or something. Something for the kids. I forget what. They're always up to something. But we are here, and we have a really cool episode, an episode that we had started discussing when we had you on last season to talk about the Karluk. We did 4 main episodes, and then our special bonus episode about the Wrangel Island expedition. So we talked about Vilhjalmur Stefansson a lot.
We did. Still not enough.
We'll talk about it a little bit today, not as much. Whenever possible, as I was taking notes, I was trying to yank the narrative away from Stefansson onto something else.
See, I love to talk about Stefansson. Just know if Stef has no haters, I am no longer upon this earth. So I will talk about him at any opportunity. This is great. So I understand the desire to not make it a completely Stef-centric episode, but we're going to throw a little bit in there. Just a little bit about some of his schemes.
On the hate pyramid, Jess is like up here at the top. Rudolf Anderson is like one rung down.
Yeah, Rudolf and Mabel Anderson might have me beat, actually. They're possibly 2 of the only people throughout history who might have me beat.
Let's see. So before we get into things here, we do have a new patron to thank. So thanks, Dan, for joining us over on Patreon. There's a bunch of cool stuff on there already. We have some cool new stuff in the works that'll be coming out soon. For anyone who's not a patron, we're over on patreon.com/beyondthebreakers. There's 2 tiers. You can support at the able C person tier or the second mate tier. You'll get some bonus episodes out of that. You'll get access to episodes a little bit early, really early, actually, sometimes, because lately I've been forgetting to release them on main. So you've been getting them like a week early. Also, for everyone, you don't have to be a patron. You can join our Discord, which I need to log on to at some point soon. I haven't been on there in a couple weeks.
I haven't either. I'm in the server, and I'm in a lot of Discord servers, and it's very difficult to keep up with all of them. But I feel like the Beyond the Breakers server is one of the better, less obnoxious ones. I'm just not on as much as I should be.
That's mainly because nothing
Lots
happens
of quality
there.
people there.
Yeah, there's great people there, but there's very little action. So yes, I mean, in that sense, yes. Sometimes, like I'm in the Canuck is a Slur Discord server. Also, that's the only other one I ever go to, and it is hopping all the time. But yeah, the Discord's there. There's some cool stuff over there. We'll post. I'll get on there occasionally. Taylor, I think, is more active on there than I am. But next, in terms of housekeeping stuff, we have our traditional media check-in. Jess, what have you been watching or listening to or doing even?
So I have not really historically been a sports girl, but I played sports in high school. But as far as being an adult watching sports, it just hasn't really landed with me until I discovered the Professional Women's Hockey League. And that was maybe 6 or 8 months ago. And I have been completely obsessed. It's taken over a lot of my brain space in a way that I was not anticipating. So I have been following the off season, watching all of my teams get decimated in an expansion draft, and sort of finally understanding like the pain and suffering that, my husband and other diehard sports fans in my life undergo whenever their teams get ripped apart by expansion and roster changes. So it's been an interesting experience. But it's been a lot of fun too. So enjoying the PWHL. As far as what I'm reading, my book club, my library book club, just finished a book called We Used to Live Here by Marcus Cleaver. And it is a book that I might not have necessarily chosen for my book club, which has the makeup of most library book clubs. I think generally women on the older side, middle-aged and above, who generally like kind of relationship fiction. And I accidentally picked this really wild, like House of Leaves style book, and they hated it and they hate me. I think they've forgiven me, but they really did not connect with this book at all. I thought it was kind of cool, but they did not care for it. So we're gonna go back to something a little more traditional, a little kind of more traditional murder mystery for next month. So hopefully they're happy. And as far as TV watching, I have been watching, I don't know that I'd say enjoying completely, the new Cape Fear on Apple TV. The show itself, maybe not great, but Javier Bardem is having the time of his life. And I'm really enjoying him just chew these people up and spit them out. So
He plays the villain, right? He plays Max, what's his name? Max something? Max Cady? Is that his name?
Max Cady, yes. And they've made a lot of changes from kind of the original movie, and they've been interesting changes, but he is just having the best time. And I'm just enjoying the ride, watching him just completely own this family. So that's been a kind of a fun TV experience.
Your comparison of your book to House of Leaves reminds me. I worked at Half Price Books. I started working there kind of right, maybe around the peak time of when House of Leaves was really a hot item, and so a lot of people looking for it. And it was one of those that when someone asked, "Hey, do you have House of Leaves?" you could kind of see the twinkle in their eye of like, yeah, that's the kind of stuff I read, isn't that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have never read House of Leaves. I know that it uses some weird design stuff to convey parts of the story, but I've heard good things about it overall.
It is I can't say I've completely finished House of Leaves because it is a very frustrating read because there's some very interesting physical things happening on the page in front of you, and you just get ripped around between different storylines. And at some point I just kind of set it down and said, I'm going to pick this back up later, and just didn't pick it up. But it is there is absolutely a certain type of person between House of Leaves and anything by David Foster Wallace, that same type of very specific person who wants you to know what they're reading. And it's almost, I don't want to say it's performative because I don't know, maybe, I'm sure there are a lot of people who have genuinely enjoyed a lot of things that they've read that are not for me, but I know, especially in the public library, you do get a decent amount of people who really want you to know what they're reading and think that we're going to be very impressed. And I promise you, your librarians are not impressed by what you're reading. We're just happy you're reading. Whatever you read is fine with us. We have no judgment. So don't feel like you have to come up to the desk with your David Foster Wallace and your House of Leaves. You can just read the trashy romantasy and we will like you just as well.
That's good advice for all of our listeners out there.
Read what you enjoy.
Let's see. For me, we've still been watching Mad Men. We're about halfway through the whole series now in Mad Men. We're really enjoying it. I didn't necessarily expect to love it, but it's just a really good show.
Mm-hmm.
Reading wise, I'm reading a book called Superfly: The Unexpected Lives of the World's Most Successful Insects by Jonathan Balcom. So yes, it is about flies. It is a speed run through all of the order Diptera. So your flies, your mosquitoes, your midges, your gnats, all of those type things. And just kind of looking at the diversity of their ecological roles, their pollinators and predators and prey and their waste disposers, all of the things that they don't, there's something else that gets more credit than any fly does for all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The order Diptera tends to be like, they cover a lot of bases. I don't know, like the more I read, in a more conscious focus sense about insects, it's like really my favorite insects are like the last ones I read about. So it just kind of jumps around. It's like one day it's like, oh, beetles are really cool. And then it's like, oh, Hymenoptera is where it's at. It's gotta be ants and wasps. So anyway, reading about flies, which is interesting because like, your common housefly, I think even among, bug people who love insects, no one really loves the fly, like just the regular housefly. Not a lot of love for mosquitoes either, even among insect researchers. just in general. It's a bit interesting to read a bit more into those, because it's like they're one of the animals that we know the most about in terms of, sequencing their genome, and one that has been studied for a long time. But at the same time, it's, we're still learning stuff about the housefly, which is also kind of crazy to think about. So yeah, it's been fun. I had a dung beetle in my window at work today. I was very excited.
Oh.
Speaking of insects.
I don't know that I've ever seen a dung beetle in person.
That's the first one I've ever seen and been able to actually handle, because it was just right there in the window. And yeah, I don't know, they're, for something that seems like it would be really commonplace and is really commonplace, I guess you don't actually really see them. I'm not around that much dung usually. So, but anyway, that was kind of a cool surprise. I texted Katie about it. It was a nice start to my day, letting him back outside.
Now, everything I know about dung beetles is from my ancient Egypt phase as a kid. So I don't have any new knowledge about dung beetles. I didn't even know that they were in the States. So that is good to know.
Nothing post 2500 BC.
No. And nothing since I was about 10 years old either.
My office is actually really well set up for if you're interested in the circle of life, because I've got, we're by the lake, so you have all the little lake flies and mayflies and stuff. They're hanging out on the window screen. I've got a bunch of the little jumping spiders. They hunt those guys. Outside, there's this bush and this tree that's always full of wasps. They're preying on the spiders. You got birds swooping in and eating the wasps. It's great. You can just watch the whole circle of life happen there. So let's get into our episode today. So our episode today it's something of a spinoff from the Karluk, or at least it covers some of the themes that we touched on in that. And I think first wanted to just recap some of those related issues. So we're kind of focusing on Arctic sovereignty in this episode. Looking back at that, we had those four-part series on the Karluk. We talked a lot about her captain, Robert Bartlett. We talked a lot about expedition leader Vilhjalmur Stefansson. And after, I think, literally 8 hours of Karluk, we did a bonus episode. And the bonus episode's it's 2 hours and 45 minutes. It's also quite long. We did that on Stefansson's next project, the Wrangel Island expedition. And we talked about that really harrowing survival tale of Ada Blackjack, a story within that larger story that's, worth telling on its own.
Yeah. Well, since we're talking about sovereignty, I just wanted to kind of throw out some of the sovereignty related issues that we talked about in the Karluk series and also in the Wrangel Island series, or Wrangel Island episode. So this became a sovereignty question whenever the survivors of the Karluk raised the flag of the Commonwealth on Wrangel Island in 1914, because that is a moment that they're going to come back to later on and say, all right, we have established a colony here at Wrangel Island. The Commonwealth has established a colony. So that flag raising and the fact that we have photographic evidence of that flag raising is something that's going to come into play quite a bit later on. So there is that sort of flimsy, questionable Canadian claim on Wrangel Island already. So that happened in 1914 when the survivors of the Karluk were marooned there on Wrangel Island. And then when we jumped ahead and talked about the actual Wrangel Island expedition, this was in 1921 when, at Stef's direction, a team of 1 Canadian and 3 Americans who were willing to renounce their American citizenship claimed Wrangel Island for Canada, which is a thing that, as we'll get into later, the Canadian government absolutely did not ask them to do. So these were some of...
It seems like a crazy thing to renounce your American citizenship for, but I don't know, in the year 2026, I would probably do that too. Why
not? Hey, Canada, call me,
Historically, Canada's not much better. I know, but
I know.
Still, I would be much more easily convinced to do that now, probably.
And I think it's interesting too that these types of expeditions are often framed in terms of nationalism, but here you've got 3 Americans who are doing about the least American thing you can do, which is to renounce their citizenship and go claim a piece of land for another country. So not really. At least not from the American side, not really tying into nationalism too much there.
I guess it is sort of like backdoor patriotic because it is, taking away a piece of land that would otherwise belong to Russia. So
This is true. This is true. Yeah. But I thought that these two instances kind of identify that there's an interest in this subject, and there's a lot of questions around who actually owns the Arctic. How did we get here? How do you go about claiming land? If you're a country and you are looking to claim land in the Arctic, how does that work? And I think that talking about these two kind of Stef-centric episodes is interesting. And when you throw in the stuff that you're going to talk about that expedition, what is the name
Neptune.
of the ship? The Low expedition, the Neptune. Okay. That's going to kind of talk a little bit about how Canada decided to start going about and enforcing the claims that they'd made on this Arctic territory.
Yeah, I was definitely reminded a bit, and I didn't end up including any here, but I was reminded a bit towards the beginning, I think, of the Karluk series. We talked about the concept of Crocker land.
Yes.
This, heretofore not technically documented piece of land that, based on these dredgings they're doing and based on some of these other measurements, well, there should be a piece of land, up here.
Mm-hmm.
And, the idea of expanding, your nation's dominions simply by finding more of it and saying, oh, by the way, yes, we actually own this too. It was here the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Got some of that also coming up from the Neptune. That, and then I was going to also say, like, as you're reading through this and some of the stuff from the Neptune expedition is, you kind of also get a sense of in the series you had compared this to, one of the appeals of this heroic age of Arctic exploration is that these guys are essentially the astronauts, the cosmonauts of their time. They're going places that people either have not been or certainly haven't spent extensive amounts of time. And they're documenting it. They're measuring these things. They're yes, of course, they're slapping their name all over these things. But there is that same sense of it's today what we would associate with outer space. And
yeah,
in the same sense, like with this, some of the stuff we'll cover is it's discussed, at least by some of these people, the same way that we would discuss like the moon. You're not allowed to claim territory on the moon because like that's that belongs to, no one and everyone sort of.
Mm-hmm.
One of the initial articles, like back when we were discussing the Karluk, that tilted me a bit towards this topic is one by Trevor Levere. It's called Vilhjalmur Stefansson, The Continental Shelf and a New Arctic Continent. I don't know if you want to read the quotes here.
Canadian political concern with its Arctic territories was minimal until the turn of the century, when the Royal Northwestern Mounted Police established Arctic detachments, for example, one at Herschel Island, established in 1903 to control American whalers who wintered there. The Canadian Arctic Patrol began in 1903 to assert sovereignty over Hudson Bay and the Arctic Islands. Such activities prepared the government to support northern exploration and help to explain its adoption of the Canadian Arctic Expedition of 1913 to 1918.
So that sort of sets the stage for kind of both of the things we've been talking about here. Something I did want to, I guess, run past you and see if I'm understanding this right, because I think you had made a note about it too. Because Herschel Island is very far west. That's basically Alaska. Because I was confused at first. I was thinking that the Neptune was the ship that established the post at Herschel Island, and I don't believe it is. Because I was looking at the map, and Herschel Island's like way too far west, and I think the Neptune only really is around Hudson Bay and Baffin Bay.
Yeah, Herschel Island is in the Beaufort Sea.
Okay. And then there was a line here where it says, in 1903, concurrent with the extension of police authority to Herschel Island in the Western Arctic, the Neptune expedition headed north to enforce Canadian jurisdiction in the Eastern Arctic. So I was making sure I was reading that correctly, that these are two separate things that are simply, they're two prongs of the same endeavor, I guess.
Yeah, I believe so. And again, I am not an expert on Canadian history by any stretch of the imagination, but that is how I read that as well.
So something we touched on in the main series and the bonus was this desire to make the expeditions as Canadian as possible. You were just talking about these nationalistic urges that are being undertaken by non-nationals in many cases. Like we said, that often proved to be a struggle. Stefansson is quoted in, I think it's the Ross article, about needing to turn to, quote, other parts of the empire. So your Scotland and Australia and New Zealand. and even from outside of it, with personnel joining the endeavor from France, from Denmark, from Norway, and the United States. I was trying to match these together. I know France was Beauchamp, Norway was Mayman, United States was Bert McConnell. Who was from Denmark?
Denmark was Fritz Johansen, who was one of the anthropologists, I think, an anthropologist with the Southern Party.
Oh, that's why. Okay, that's why I don't really know him that well, I guess.
There's Southern Party guys mixed in here, too.
Southern Party, get out of here.
I know, they don't count.
That quote we just read mentioned the establishment of a Royal Northwestern Mounted Police post at Herschel Island. That's kind of what we talked about. That's sort of happening in parallel to what we're going to focus on here. Herschel Island had a couple brief appearances in the Karluk episodes. That was one of the early waypoints for the Northern Party to link up with the rest of the expedition and make, those adjustments, of making sure the equipment's on the right ship it's supposed to be with the right party, the personnel are with the right party they're supposed to be with.
Yeah, that was the "we'll sort it all out at Herschel Island." That was the Stef's kind of famous line. We'll deal with that when we all get to Herschel Island.
Which coincidentally never happened. The Northern Party doesn't get to Herschel Island. Kind of like we said, it's not even that they didn't finish this. They never really even started the way it was supposed to. And so they don't make that link up before getting stuck in the ice and then, pulled westward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Other Herschel Island bits. It was Herschel Island that Jack Hadley was planning to get off of the Karluk and then continue east to his ultimate destination on Banks Island. And then that Northwestern Mounted Police Station at Herschel was also the intended destination of that box of cigars that they made the top prize in the chess tournament. So a few times where Herschel Island comes up in that series.
Mm-hmm. And the cigars were the bribe that Stef was going to try to bribe the mounted police stationed at Herschel Island with.
Not even like an official gift.
Yeah, it was a gift, air quotes.
And then this is tangential to the actual episode. I did have to look up, when did the Northwestern Mounted Police just become the Royal Canadian Mounted Police? And if I remember correctly, it was 1921. So right around this time. I was just curious as when did they change their name? So we can rewind a bit because we covered that part of the story in a lot of detail. And so I was kind of interested in backing things up and seeing sort of how did we get to that point. So we're going to take a look at the Neptune expedition and what role it played in Canada's attempts to establish sovereignty over the Arctic. So I think you have a little bit here.
I do. And we touched on this a little bit in the quote that we read kind of at the beginning of this section. But prior to the very early 20th centuries, when you wanted to claim a piece of land for your country, you would either claim it in the Arctic because it was a part of your existing land, because there was some kind of political means. For example, Denmark controlling Greenland because it had taken over Norway's claim to Greenland in 1814, or through exploration and conquest, which is what we're talking about here. And if you've claimed a piece of land for your country in the Arctic, it is sort of your responsibility as the quote unquote parent country to exercise jurisdiction over that claim. It's sort of like how with a copyright, if you get a copyright for something, you have to defend your own copyright. If you see other people using your copyright, you have to try to stop them or you'll eventually lose that copyright. It's sort of like what's happening here. If you have a claim and you don't defend your claim, then pretty soon your claim becomes meaningless and anybody else can just walk all over your land and take your resources, and you won't really have any say in that because you're not enforcing your claim. So this is something that some countries have historically done a better job at than others. Russia has usually, it seems like, been pretty good with enforcing their claims. Canada historically did not do a very good job with this, at least not until the early 20th century. So this was a situation where you have American whalers, people from Denmark, people from all over the world coming up into the Canadian Arctic and using their resources, hunting their game, whaling, doing all sorts of things on what is Canadian territory, and certainly not giving a cut of any of that to the Canadian government, and also stripping an area pretty bare of its natural resources. So this is something that Canada would like to put a stop to, or at least put some curb a little bit. And that's sort of the basis for the Neptune expedition and how we get here is they decided that they were tired of being robbed blind and ready to start enforcing their claim to this territory.
That initial basis for Canadian sovereignty in the far north was Britain's transfer of these regions to Canada in 1870 and 1880. But just what these regions included was not fully established. I mean, there's still a lot of the map that we haven't totally filled in at this point. So the primary article that I was reading about this is from W. Gillies Ross. This is an article called Canadian Sovereignty in the Arctic, the Neptune Expedition of 1903 to 1904. And if you could read that quote for us.
These two sessions, however vague, provided the politico-legal framework for Canadian sovereignty in the North, but it remained for Canada to turn paper privileges into real and undisputed possession. There was, however, an atmosphere of complacency or lack of interest regarding these remote regions, and effective control was slow to be exerted.
And so, as you alluded to, the Canadian government is soon shaken out of this complacency for several reasons, but in part due to the explorations of Norwegian Captain Otto Sverdrup in the Arctic archipelago, several of which he mapped and named. So you've got some Norwegians kicking around up there. That is your that is what should spur you into action. Whenever you find Norwegians getting into your business, you should get to work there.
Absolutely. We can't accept that. So
Erling Haaland is up there. He's naming islands after himself. He's scoring goals. Let's see. So up to this point, Canadian expeditions into the deep north had still been focused on the lingering hope of establishing a transit zone through the Arctic. In this case, specifically establishing a port on the south shore of Hudson Bay and sending ships through the Hudson Strait. 3 of these expeditions were commanded by A.R. Gordon, and a 4th under William, I assume, Wakeham, took place in 1897. None of these expeditions established a real permanent Canadian presence in the Arctic, though. They did highlight to the Canadian government the prevalence of foreign whaling operations in waters that they did intend to firmly claim as their own. This reminded me of you're playing like Age of Empires or something, and you're exploring, you're foraging, you're mining, and you find another civilization's villagers mining out of your mines. I'm going to use these, so like you need to not be here.
Yeah.
Because of the declining whale populations in the waters near Greenland, this historic fishing and whaling grounds, this has been in operation for well over 200 years this is just, the Europeans that we're talking here. But these whaling operations had moved further and further west over the course of the 19th century. Very similar to what Taylor and I discussed in the Essex episode. Why are these whalers out of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard? Why are they sailing, to the coast of Japan to hunt these whales? Because they have to.
Because they've hunted all the other whales.
And so, a very similar thing's happening here. The whaling grounds off of Greenland are pretty much picked over. And so they're having to push further and further west into this Arctic archipelago. And so these are no longer seasonal voyages. This isn't something you're doing for just a couple months. These expeditions, these typically require overwintering, and therefore they need more permanent whaling stations closer to the whaling grounds. And so the actual whalers that we're dealing with here are largely American, English, and Scottish, with Americans responsible for the largest proportion of whales killed, but also the lion's share of seal, walrus, musk ox, and other animals hunted for their skins. Quoting here a bit from Ross.
No government asserted authority over the regions in which the whalemen cruised. The captains were never notified of policies or restrictions on the killing of whales and other animals, navigation within territorial waters, the establishment of shore bases, or trade and employment among the Inuit. Indeed, in the minds of the whalemen, the Arctic was beyond the sphere of national sovereignties, a no man's land in which they were free to operate as they wished.
Yeah, this is just the practical application of what you were just talking about, the idea that, well, no one else is using this.
Yeah, nobody's enforcing these rules, so they may as well not have rules.
There's no formal government, restrictions on this, so I'm going to hunt as many as I want to.
Mm-hmm.
And, settle wherever I want to for my whaling base.
And not just that, but I know we talked a little bit about Herschel Island earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Herschel Island was also sort of a a place where a lot of people were meeting and gathering, and there was gambling, there was sex work, there were a lot of other unregulated industries, and a lot of things happening out of Herschel Island. So it's not just concern about the land and the wildlife. It's also like, this is kind of a lawless territory here. This is kind of a no man's land. It's like the Wild West out here. So Canada would like to impose some law and order over all of this.
So Diamond Janice refers to this period as one of governmental myopia on the part of Canada, which is a cool, an apt phrasing. So I made a note here. I didn't read much beyond the Wikipedia. One of the sort of spurring factors in this sort of multiple motivations for Canada to be a bit more assertive here is this Alaska boundary dispute and its, in scare quotes, resolution in 1903. Is that something that you're familiar with?
I have also read the Wikipedia page. I can't say that I have any great familiarity with it, but it all kind of, I think, ties in pretty nicely with what we're talking about here. So after America took over parts of Alaska from the Russians, there was a dispute over the boundary, and eventually I think they went into arbitration, and I believe it's the British government, which of course, Canada is kind of part of the British Empire. Canada was sort of thrown under the bus by the British government because they decided they'd rather have positive relationships with the Americans than enforce this Canadian boundary that Canada by this time has, was hoping to strengthen. So it was an example of Canada being, I think, rightfully pretty angry with the Crown.
That was my biggest real takeaway, was Canada's feeling more or less betrayed by, the British government, who's supposed to sort of have their backs against, their big bully to the south. Obviously, Britain not wanting to escalate things, probably with the United States. So makes sense. So there's this sort of bitterness in this region for Canadians, for the Canadian government. So this Neptune expedition, starting in 1903, would be different from previous expeditions in its intention to establish a permanent presence in the north. And so the name of the expedition here refers to DGS Neptune, a 465-ton former sealer reinforced for work in the ice. DGS was a new one for me. That is a ship designation I had never seen before, and I would not have been able to guess what it was.
I think it's Dominion government ship.
Yes. That is not what I'd seen before.
Well, for you, that's pretty significant, as many ships as you know about. So it must be a really weird one.
I guess we've just never done a Canadian ship from this period, maybe. But yeah, that was new.
I feel like we are learning so much about Canadian history through this.
We are
researching this episode. So we're learning all sorts of new things. Maybe there's all sorts of cool Canadian ships out there, and we had no idea.
Let's see. So this ship this expedition rather, is under the command of Albert Peter Lowe, a geologist by training and someone with pretty considerable experience in the Arctic and subarctic. The ship itself was captained by Captain Bartlett. Again?
A different Captain Bartlett.
Captain S.W. Bartlett. Sex worker Bartlett, I assume, is what that stands for.
Absolutely. That's what it means. There are just infinity Captain Bartletts out there. It was a very, very prominent sailing family. Bob had uncles and nephews, and everybody in his family was a sea captain. So there's a whole bunch of Captain Bartletts out there. But only this one that is a sex worker. So that was
going to be my question, is if we knew of any relation. And so presumably there is
probably
some, but maybe not closely related, but quite possibly a relation.
I would bet money that there is some sort of relation, but I couldn't tell you how close, because there are so many Captain Bartletts.
Yeah, I saw that. I got really excited when I saw the name, and I was like, oh, that doesn't work out. So in addition to the scientific team on board, there's a 7-man contingent of Northwest Mounted Police under the command of Major J.D. Moody. J.D. Vance. Neptune left Halifax in late summer of 1903, bound for Hudson Bay, with a few whaling station stops along the way. She has this little pamphlet handout thing, basically, that she's giving out with all of the new rules and regulations and what she's doing on her voyage. And so she overwinters at Cape Fullerton. This is a popular station for American and Scottish whalers. This is like northwest tip of Hudson Bay. This looks like a miserable place to spend the winter.
Yeah.
So she anchors there on September 23rd. Although at this time, there's only one other vessel anchored there. And this is the American whaler Era, out of New Bedford, Massachusetts, captained by George Comer. This leads to like an interesting setup where you have these two ships just spending the winter next to each other that are like not otherwise affiliated with one another, but they're just kind of wintered in together. And so this was not an encounter of coincidence. In the full report, which I was just reading bits of online on the expedition, Lowe writes, "Our instructions were to find and, if possible, to pass the winter in company with the American whaling ship known to be in Hudson Bay." So this is kind of like their target.
Yeah.
As they're approaching this area, Neptune is asking around. They're on the lookout for this whaler. The Era not being seen at Depot Island, Cape Fullerton seemed to be a likely place to find her. And this is very soon confirmed by local Inuit who said that whaler was there for the winter. There is a nice little Terror and Erebus shout out in Lowe's report as well. This is near the beginning. I think this was on like page 50 of the copy I was looking at. "As many of the crew as could be spared were allowed to land at Beachy Island to visit this historic spot where the ill-fated and heroic Franklin and the crews of the Erebus and Terror spent their last winter on land, and where the headquarters of the search party was established in subsequent years."
And I think at the end of the notes, you put a picture of them on Beachy Island, which is a really cool photo.
Yeah, I was going to make that the episode art for this.
No, that's a good one. It's I was wondering if we'd be able to get through an entire episode about Arctic sovereignty without at least a token mention of Franklin expedition. So I'm glad we got that in there.
Nope, not possible. Can't avoid it. Let's see here. So we've talked on the show a few times about the late years of American whaling. Like I was just talking about how these voyages get longer and longer as the whales are further and further away, as these whaling grounds get depleted. And, right around this time, this is, early 1900s. At this point, whaling is truly an industry out of another time.
Mm-hmm.
And so quoting again here from Ross,
"Whale stocks had been virtually exhausted throughout the region, and trading for furs, skins, and ivory had become the economic mainstay of such voyages. The prospects of voyages being profitable had diminished to the point where there were seldom more than 2 or 3 vessels in the bay, in sharp contrast to the situation prevailing during the first decade of whaling after 1860, when 51 American whalers killed more than 400 whales."
And so that's something like from very, very perceptive listeners maybe picked up on that when we were talking about the Era just now. But the fact that Neptune can sail into Hudson Bay looking for the American whaler that's there is like a mass. It really shows how massively things have changed in this region. It almost kind of makes it seem a little bit silly that now's when they're enforcing their sovereignty. When
really,
we kind of got all the whales.
You could have done this 75 years ago and really done something here, but
now Canada's looking to exert its authority more directly in this region. And as we'll see here shortly, Lowe and the Neptune have an opportunity to kind of flex this new Canadian muscle in the Arctic in a sort of controlled setting. This is like the smallest possible way you could start doing it. There's one foreign whaler, and they're parked right next to it, and they can start practicing some of this enforcement in, a kind of a low stakes situation. None of them can go anywhere. So, and of course, we're talking about establishing sovereignty over this territory. These things are also, of course, going to apply to the local Inuit, starting here near Cape Fullerton, and then, of course, expanding out. And that's another focus of the Ross article. Another person of interest on board the Neptune was 26-year-old Loris Elijah Borden, who he wore kind of several related hats on this expedition. First and foremost, he was the ship's surgeon, but he also served as botanist on the scientific side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Expanding out from his role as the ship's surgeon, he's also investigating the health among the local Inuit. He's looking specifically into occurrences of cancer, tuberculosis, and syphilis. And I had asked in the notes if these was this triad of particular interest on other expeditions? Was there something specific about this location?
So whenever you have expeditions like this that are interacting with local Inuit populations, very frequently you'll have like a ship surgeon or a botanist, or if they have like an ethnologist or some kind of anthropologist or somebody, they will look into the health of these communities just for their own scientific knowledge, but also often some of the surgeons and the doctors that have come aboard have been trying to help these people who often, do not have access to the same standard of medical care as some of the other, maybe, as maybe the whalers would, or some of the other residents. The Inuit groups tended to not have that same level of medical care. So if you look at, like, for example, the Crocker Island expedition, you have Harrison Hunt, who's the doctor on there, and he would go out into the Inuit communities and he would treat people's ailments. And two ailments that he did come across very frequently were tuberculosis and syphilis. Tuberculosis, because it's very contagious, and syphilis because it's also very contagious, and also because, as I think we talked about before, often you had whalers who would have relationships with Indigenous women and possibly would pass on some diseases to them. And because many of the Indigenous groups in this area practiced a sort of non-monogamy, those sexual transmitted diseases would then spread through entire communities. So they were always looking out for things that they could maybe help with. I'm not aware if they checked for cancer. I assume that some of them probably did, but that's not something that has stuck out in the expeditions that I've studied, at least. But yeah, the CAE, also the Southern Party, did some ethnographical work, and in addition to, doing things like taking heights and weights and measurements of Indigenous people, they would also attempt to treat some of their ailments when they were able to. And some of this was done from a good place. Some of it was done from a very racist and paternalistic place, but it was not uncommon for ship surgeons or doctors or people who were studying these groups to attempt medical treatment on them.
Something else that just I thought was amusing from the Ross article, this is from page 93 of it. And so it's talking about basically some of the sort of battles in the press about, this Arctic sovereignty. And it says, in addition to claiming historic rights, American writers raised the issue of the territorial status of Hudson Bay. Prior to the departure of the Neptune, a member of the Canadian Parliament had suggested that the bay should be declared territorial waters and renamed the Canadian Sea. Which struck me as like, I don't know, it's not quite Trumpian with like renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, but it's like coming from the same type of place of like, well, let's just change the name and it'll make it more ours.
That'll show them. It makes me want to get a printout of that map and get a Sharpie and cross out the name and put Canadian Sea.
And so the other part of that argument being that I think an attempt to basically claim that Hudson Strait was entirely territorial waters and therefore all of Hudson Bay should be as well, which I don't think holds up to cartographic scrutiny. I think Hudson Strait is far too wide to make that argument, but they tried. So anyway, I just thought that was very funny. The Canadian Sea.
Yes.
So we might be excused for expecting a level of tension to develop between the Neptune party and that of the era. They're, at least on paper, the Neptune is there to sort of rein in ships like the era. This doesn't seem to have been the case, at least not explicitly, and not among like the men themselves. There are some things here later where Captain Comer has his issues with what the Neptune is up to. But it seems like the men seem to have gotten along pretty famously as they spend this winter together. Ross describes their relations as cordial, cooperative, social, and even celebratory at certain, holiday times. There's a lot of sharing of food, resources, equipment. They collaborate on a search and rescue mission. They even collaborate on the construction of this police outpost,
which I do find surprising.
Yes.
That seems interesting to me.
Did the whalers know that's what they were building?
I don't know.
Is my question. Like, because it seems like, well, this is there to kind of, for people like you. So
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe they told them it was something else. We're building a gazebo. I don't know.
Party room.
This is this is coming from that report on the Neptune expedition from Lowe.
Games and cards were provided for the use of all. Musical instruments, including a piano, were in frequent use, while a weekly lecture, dance, and newspaper went far to agreeably pass away the long winter evenings, which were further relieved by visits between the ships and to the snow houses of the natives built on the ice close alongside.
The way that it says a weekly lecture, dance, and newspaper, it makes it sound like they're all the same event.
Yes.
Like the same performance. They have kind of all the same things we see when we have these guys who are icebound, on the ships. They're sort of getting up to the same types of stuff, which is kind of cool to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How quickly these crews meld together, even though they're very different. They have very different reasons for being here at Cape Fullerton.
Yes.
This is not shaping up to be the violent expulsion of American whalers from the bay, the way it's sort of being described by some, of your maybe louder voices in, I don't know, the American media, the newspapers, things like that. That's not what's happening here. Here we've got some of the actual stuff that they are proclaiming and sharing here. Ross quotes the proclamation that was distributed to whaling ships and whaling stations that were visited by the Neptune. And this is originally quoted out of Janice.
A detachment of the NWMP has been sent into Hudson Bay for the purpose of maintaining law and order and enforcing the laws of Canada in the territories adjacent to the said bay and to the north thereof. Headquarters have for the present been established at Fullerton. This has also been made a port of entry for vessels entering Hudson Bay and adjacent waters. All vessels will be required to report there and pay customs duties on dutiable goods before landing any portion of their cargoes on any place in the said territories. Duty on goods imported into Canadian territories lying to the north of Hudson Bay will be collected for the present by a Canadian cruiser, which will visit those waters annually or more frequently. Any violation of the laws of Canada will be dealt with by an officer of the police accompanying such cruiser.
The implication I get from that is like, are you only sending one officer? I feel like some people might not be afraid of that.
And also they're allowed to just go around and, violate the laws of Canada until the single officer shows up on a cruiser, but they've got plenty of time to, stop violating the law and clear out while they wait for that guy to show up on the cruiser. It just doesn't seem like a very efficient system.
Hey, that guy's breaking the law. Call the Mountie.
Yeah. 12 hours later, oh no, the Mountie's coming.
And so that just the kind of the phrasing, the wording of it's definitely a different situation as it relates to sovereignty. On its face, it's kind of like a scaled down version of the Portuguese cartaz system from the Indian Ocean. We did a bonus episode about that a few months ago. If you accept the concept of state sovereignty over territory, that's a totally separate question. I think this is easier to argue that, okay, Canada might be able to control this territory more so than Portugal controlling the west coast of India. But anyway, some of the phrasing was just kind of sticking your hand into an already operating system and just pulling out money from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, I think this is an easier argument to make that, okay, Canada should maybe be involved with some of this. Again, accepting the concept of sovereignty in the first place. Getting into more of a bit more of the details from this Neptune expedition. So we did mention that kind of concurrently with this, Canada is establishing its sovereignty elsewhere. One of those places being Herschel Island, further out west. There was a third spot that was mentioned, and I forget where it was specifically. I've got it here. It was Fort McPherson in the Mackenzie River Valley. Is mentioned also in Ross. Kind of multi-pronged attempt at, just establishing this government presence. As you added to the notes here, this is when they informed the local Inuit that they have a king now. which is great.
Surprise!
Everybody likes to have a king.
Yeah.
I can read this one.
Okay.
Through the interpreter, the major told the natives that there was a big chief over them all, who had many tribes of different colors, and how this big chief, who was Edward VII, had the welfare of all his peoples at heart. King Edward wanted them all to do what was right and good, and had sent the major as his personal representative, or in other words, the king could not come himself, so I was to act for him. The major wanted them to do what was right and good, and to settle all quarrels, but he would punish all offenders.
Sure.
What they've always wanted. Another thing we have here is that implementing customs procedures and prohibiting trade in musk ox hides because they're an endangered species. A bit more here on those musk ox hides. This is from Superintendent Moody's report. So this is the guy who is the head of the Mountie detachment with this expedition.
On arrival here, I found the slaughter of these animals for the sake of their skins was much greater than supposed. The United States schooner Era took home over 350 skins on her last voyage. The Scotch steamer Active had, I am informed, between 150 and 200 skins. Knowing the wish of the government in this matter, I took the only method which would be of practical use and issued on November 8th, 1903, a notice prohibiting the export, etc.
I'm sure I read this in one of the articles, but I couldn't quite find it. Does this prohibition on... Is this just a prohibition on exporting the hides, or is it on hunting them as well?
So, and I'll get into this in a little bit more when I talk about Knud Rasmussen, but basically the indigenous people are allowed like a certain amount of hunting and keeping the skins for their own personal use. But other people are not supposed to be hunting them or exporting the skins. They're supposed to be just leaving them alone and letting them be.
Okay, so like other things, if the police catch you with a small amount, you can argue that this is a personal use skin.
If you're indigenous, you can. If you're not indigenous, you're really not supposed to have them at all. But
there was a reference later to something about doing it to sort of preserve the ability of the natives to do their hunting.
Yes, but also like everything else, I'm sure that the Mounties there are able to be bribed with, say, a box of cigars if you really wanted some muskox skins. I'm sure that there was a way that you could make that happen.
Captain Comer of the era, he did seem to be, as Ross suggests, at least personally offended by the seemingly targeted nature of the Neptune's proclamations. It's the "I think you should leave" sketch with Brian's hat. He's just listening to it being read out. And he's like, "Are they talking about me? Is this me they're talking about?" So Ross suggests that it was information about this American whaling presence at Fullerton that convinced Lowe to make it that his destination, and also for Moody to select it as the location for his police post. So knowing this is where the Americans hang out, that's where we need to be setting up our shop here. However, both Scottish and American stations had been visited by the Neptune prior to her entering Hudson Bay in September 1903. So it wasn't just the Americans. The Scots were getting it too.
Mm-hmm.
The following summer, when the conditions allowed for navigation to the north, a police patrol was able to carry the same proclamations to the Scots at Repulse Bay. So this is sort of insinuated by Ross, and I would probably agree. I think partially Comer's feelings of being singled out probably come from the fact that he has to spend the whole winter anchored right next to them.
Sure, yeah.
Oh yeah, well, definitely they're talking about me. It's you're kind of their only target for a while here.
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
And also, they were friends. They were friendly. They'd had all this time together over the winter, and they formed all these, brotherly bonds. And now all of a sudden, the cops come out and they're in trouble. I would feel singled out too. I get where he's coming from.
And so, since we're focusing our discussion on sovereignty in the Arctic, I think it's interesting to see how quickly that sovereignty extended down to the micro level of captain-crew relations, something that neither Comer nor probably any sea captain, any grizzled old whaler is going to appreciate. This comes from Ross. If you just want to read I don't even know what color that is, orange, and then I'll read the green part in the middle.
A shipboard incident revealed the full dimensions of the new relationship. Not even on his own vessel was he the supreme authority. One of his men acted in an insubordinate manner, so Comer put him in irons. Under normal circumstances, the matter would probably have ended there, but the presence of a police detachment close at hand presented the opportunity for an appeal.
Some other crew members complained to Superintendent Moody, who summoned Comer by note. At first, he ignored the message, quote, in the belief that Moody had no right to have anything to say in regard to the punishment of the men, end quote. But in the end, he went to the post to put forward his point of view.
He explained that when men talk back or refuse to work, a captain had to employ stern measures or he might find a mutiny on his hands. But Moody insisted that the punishment was too severe, and finally, after some talk, not cool, between the two men, Moody persuaded Comer to release the offender.
Comer he's working at, a small family-owned business, and they have finally hired an HR team that he has to deal with here. He can no longer do what he wants discipline-wise, and there's suddenly another parent that his crew can run to.
Yep. His team has essentially unionized. He's got another voice in the room with him. He's no longer God on his ship.
Mm-hmm. Which, this whole conversation about establishing sovereignty and this would be part of that, of saying, hey, you are in Canadian territory, so you're under Canadian jurisdiction. So I thought that was an interesting episode of that on the very, very, very micro level. We kind of started this looking at these big abstract claims that Canada's making of, yes, we technically, this is ours, even if we don't have anything out there. And now we're, they're on the decks of a ship dictating how a captain is going to treat his sailors.
Mm-hmm.
So in addition to the presence of the Neptune undermining his authority, Comer also expressed frustration in his journal about the need to share the fresh meat caught by the local Inuit, a necessity for warding off scurvy, which he notes that 2 of his men are suffering from, with I would assume the implication being that they would not have scurvy if this annoying Neptune vessel was not here eating up all the meat.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's really all I wanted to pull there. But before we move on from the Neptune and George Comer, I did want to note that Comer was really interesting to me beyond just his whaling. He's one of those figures that we come across sometimes that I wonder, how have I never heard of him before? Because he's involved in so much stuff. So in addition to his whaling, he's kind of far from, I don't know, I don't necessarily think of a whaler captain being, a supremely educated type. I mean, that's not presumably that necessary for what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But this guy is active in cartography, photography. He works as he's a known ethnologist, a naturalist, an anthropologist, a folklorist. He's doing all of this stuff in his travels. It's really, really cool. And, I was just breezing through his Wikipedia. He studies under Franz Boas. He's learning anthropology from the guy who sort of invented modern anthropology.
Yeah.
It's very cool. All of the stuff he's involved with. And I'd never heard of him before. He also has a bird named after him. It's a flightless bird. It's the Gao moorhen. It lives only on the islands of Tristan da Cunha and Gao Island in the South Atlantic.
I also have a little George Comer story. We talked a little bit about the 1913 Crockerland expedition.
Mm-hmm.
So after the Crockerland expedition discovered there is no Crockerland, there was a ship that was supposed to come get them and rescue all of the men who were left after the expedition ended. And that ship was captained by George Comer, except it got stuck in the ice for 2 years on their way to go rescue these survivors. So he was stuck in the ice on this ship for 2 years trying to rescue these people. Who eventually ends up successfully rescuing them? Bob Bartlett.
Hell yeah, Bob.
So it's funny how all of the same names just show up in the same places. And George Comer is one of those guys who's always up in the Arctic doing something.
The ship that was going to rescue the Crockerland, what was the name of that one? Because I know that
George B. Cluett.
Okay, because there were several that came up on his page. I was like, oh, I want to read more about this. And then also the one that caught my attention is that he was a mate on the whaler Canton, which has like a famous shipwreck story. I don't believe he was on it when it had its famous wreck. But yeah, he's connected to so much cool stuff. The last point of interest I wanted to draw out of that article, still trying to tie things back to sovereignty, is there's a considerable section about the foreign presence in the Canadian Arctic and how that impacted native life, even before just this explicit extension of Canadian sovereignty here. So in addition to the more visible, more material changes, your firearms and metal tools and different types of containers and food and provisions, Ross also notes that since the beginning of large-scale whaling in the 1860s, the Inuit had also adapted their seasonal hunting cycles to coincide with the presence of whaling ships overwintering in the harbors around Hudson Bay, which I thought was an interesting, like, sort of cultural ripple effect of this establishment of, at different levels of sovereignty or of imperialism or whatever you want to label it. But how, yes, beyond just the explicit, interpersonal interactions, you have these sort of cultural, butterfly effects of, because this is a new, something new in this environment, we have to adapt our way of life around it, even though it's not really, technically part of the natural world. It's still something that you kind of have to adapt to, as they do here. I thought that was very interesting. I'd I'd like to read a bit more about some of those more, I guess, grander scale impacts of this process.
And that certainly matters a whole lot more to the Indigenous people than who claims this land and who the great king is. They're much more interested in the material effects on their everyday life. And I think that really points to that. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, so I know you have a few things here at the end to sort of bring us home here.
I do. I have to talk about Stef a little bit, just a little bit. Just let me have this, okay? I also really want to talk about Knud Rasmussen, who is such a cool guy. And I want to talk about him in the context of the Danish threat of the early 1920s. So Canada, this is happening in the early 1920s. So this is post-Canadian Arctic expedition, but pre-Wrangel Island expedition. So it's that kind of period in between when the Canadians are trying to, crack down on other people using their territory, trying to really enforce their sovereignty over the Arctic. But something that they kept coming back to is that there was this colony of Indigenous people who lived in Greenland, the Greenland Inuk. And the Greenland Inuk had among their number a guy by the name of Knud Rasmussen, who was a part Greenlandic Inuk. He spoke multiple languages, fit into native spaces in a way that European explorers could not. He was charming, he was handsome, he was funny, he was well-liked. He was a very popular guy. People enjoyed when he would show up in their settlement. He was the life of the party. He was sort of the anti-Stef because people genuinely enjoyed having him around, and he fit into these communities in a way that somebody like Stef just never could. So Knud Rasmussen was located at a place called the Thule Trading Station, which is in Upper Greenland. And Greenland, of course, is owned by or a colony of Denmark. And he liked to go traveling with these Indigenous people. And while they were up there, they would exercise their rights to hunt a few of these muskoxen and use the meat and also use the pelts. That was completely okay under Canadian law. But there were these rumors that were getting back to Ottawa, to the Canadian government, that the people from Denmark might be taking more than their fair share of these muskox, and that there might be some illegal trade in muskox hide taking place at the Thule station that, of course, was operated by Knud Rasmussen, this very charismatic, popular explorer who was also Danish. So everybody was kind of up in arms about that. It turns out that their information was being fed to them by Stef, who heard rumors about what may or may not be happening at the Thule trading post from whalers and from other people who were up there, and just sort of passed that along as the truth. Now, Stef and Rasmussen did have cordial relations. Stef sent him a letter just notifying him, hey, in case you don't know, you're really limited by how much you can hunt and what you can do with these muskox, and just wanted you to know. And while he's doing that, he's also writing this other letter to Ottawa, like, oh no, the Danes are coming for us. They're taking our muskox. They're creeping closer and closer. I'm concerned that they're going to try to take possession of Ellesmere Island and continue to encroach into the Canadian Arctic. So Stef is a little bit hysterical and is also definitely working this to his benefit. There is a guy by the name of J.B. Harkin, who is the Parks Commissioner for Canada, who is very receptive to everything that Stef has to say. He's maybe a little bit paranoid too. So he's got Stef telling him all of these stories about all of these terrible things that Denmark is up to. And then he's relaying them to his superiors in Ottawa. And they are making a whole imagined threat out of this one Danish guy who is with a small band of Inuit traversing over Canadian land and not really causing any harm. I have this great quote here. The book that I'm getting this information from is Acts of Occupation by Janice Cavell and Jeff Noakes. And it is a much more fun read than you might expect based on the title and the contents. But there's this great quote in there. In Harkin, as Stefansson probably realized, he had found the ideal mark. Intelligent, energetic, and influential, yet ignorant about basic facts in the Arctic, in many ways naive, and exceptionally susceptible to any hint that Canada's interests were under threat. Harkin moved easily from a belief that Rasmussen was encroaching on Canadian territory to the conviction that the Danish explorer intended to challenge Canada's very claim to ownership of Ellesmere Island. None of this is really true. This is the first example of a pattern that tends to show up over and over again throughout this, period of a few years, where Stef has a straightforward conversation with Rasmussen. He then passes this misleading and sensationalized information on to Harkin, who panics and does whatever Stef tells him to do, whether that's to pass it along to his superiors or make a fuss about something. He's trying to spread this information far and wide in an effort to achieve Stef's goals, which usually includes more money for exploration for himself and some kind of self-promotion, something that's going to benefit Stef directly. And so Stef is able to take all of this fear and all of this panic that he has ginned up about really nothing, and turn it into an argument that this is why Canada needs to get up there and claim Wrangel Island, because the Danes are clearly coming for it, and they're going to usurp Canada's claim to Wrangel Island, this incredibly valuable piece of territory. There is something I have not been able to find out is why he was so obsessed with Wrangel Island specifically. I don't know that there is an answer, but if there is, I haven't been able to find it. But he maintained this obsession with Wrangel Island for so long. At some point, he does get Harkin to talk to his superiors, and there's talk about sending Stef north on another government-funded expedition to try to claim Wrangel Island and establish sovereignty and push away this Danish threat. But in the end, cooler heads prevailed. Not everybody believed that Harkin was conveying the information accurately. And I think by this point in Ottawa, people were pretty done with Stef. So his expedition ends up being canceled. And the government says no to him. The expedition that he was partially planned is canceled. And this is why in 1921, Stef decides to go it alone and without official government support. So when he starts setting up the Wrangel Island expedition of 1921, he had been told no by Canada explicitly. They have said, no, we are not going to fund this. Do not do this. But that didn't stop him from gathering up this one Canadian and 3 Americans and sending them to Wrangel Island and saying, claim this piece of land for Canada because I said so.
See, that's great because it fills in a lot of the sort of inner workings of the story, the Wrangel Island story, of like some of those more behind the scenes aspects of, why isn't he getting support for this? Why is he so obsessed with Wrangel Island? So yeah, very, very interesting stuff there. Geography wise, Ellesmere Island is the big one at the top of the Arctic archipelago. Is that like really, really way up there? Is that right?
I'm going to pull up a map just so I am sure.
It's way up there. It's by Greenland. It's like
It's way up there. Yeah, it's way up there. And again, Greenland is at this time and still today affiliated with Denmark. I'm not sure,
Hmm.
they're not a colony. I think that they have home rule now, but they are kind of under the leadership of the Danish government in some sense. So Denmark is responsible for Greenland, and then you've got Ellesmere Island that is right up there. So if any of this were true, it would make sense. If Knud Rasmussen had any interest at all in claiming land for Denmark that was already claimed by Canada, you can see how somebody might kind of look at the map and start to think it through and say, okay, maybe this is a concern. But that was not his goal at all. He was up there to have a good time, man, and he did have a good time. He is a really fun, interesting guy. I don't know a whole ton about him yet, but everything that I've read has been delightful, and I'm looking forward to learning more about him.
He sounds like a real character, like in the movie sense of like this would be a cool character in a movie.
Yeah.
Speaking of, I noticed this. I was actually on Bob Bartlett's Wikipedia page earlier. I was trying to find out if our SW Bartlett was related to him. And I don't know if you're familiar with this. I saw that there's because this was one of my favorite parts of the Karluk story, but I see at the bottom here, Bartlett and Kadektovik's journey through Chukotka, Siberia, is recounted as an episode in Chukchi author Yuri Ritku's novel A Dream in Polar Fog. Are you familiar with that at all?
I read that same article that you did. I have not been able to get my hands on it to read the actual novel or the actual story, but I would very much like to. So if you come across it, please send it to me, because I think that would be very interesting from that perspective.
Try to track that down if it's available in either English or Russian. I don't know if I could tackle Chukchi, but yeah, I thought that was really cool, and that was one of my favorite parts of the story. So I just wanted to bring that up.
One more thing about this book that I have to share that I found very funny. You may not find it as funny, but earlier in the book, they are quoting Rudolph and Mabel Anderson talking about Stef, kind of smack talking him. And apparently their nickname for him behind his back was Windjammer. His legal name is, of course, Vilhjalmur, and I think it was a play on that. And so they referred to him as Windjammer in their writings and to each other. And I find that very funny.
Devastating. Yeah. So I think, let's see, I think we can wrap things here for this one. Like we were saying, I think before we started recording, but yeah, there's just so many people and expeditions and endeavors involved with all of these that it just kind of opens up more doors or cans of worms, depending on how you look at it. But more opportunities for episodes and more opportunities for podcasting. Yeah. So I'm sure we will be back to this area at some point to some of these themes, because it's just, and it's such an area that, like, the Karluk was our first real dive into the Arctic, for the podcast. And like any new subject, it's like you're constantly finding new people, and it's like, oh, this guy's fascinating, and then you find all these articles about this person, and you find there's a whole book about this person, and there's erotic fan fiction about this person, and then you're just in the rabbit hole there. So there's a lot of good places to go with this. And then, as referred to, I'm going to make that the picture of the men of the Neptune at Beachy Island is going to be the episode art for this. It's a cool little picture. There.
And I think that it's kind of, it's appropriate because I know that the Franklin expedition was my first, exposure to learning about the polar regions. I think it's a lot of people's first expedition, the first thing that they learn about when they start developing an interest in the polar regions. So it's always nice to see it come back to the Franklin expedition in some way.
With that, I guess I'll just say thank you, Jess, for joining us here again.
Of course. Thank you for having me again.
Been a great topic to discuss. Always learn a lot when we have you on an episode. Any pluggables to plug for you as we sign off here?
I do have a pluggable. Some friends and I are putting together an Heroic Age of Antarctic Expedition zine called Nevermind the Blizzard. You can follow Nevermind the Blizzard on Tumblr or on Twitter. And once it comes out, it will be a pay whatever you like zine with original fiction, original art, all tied around the Heroic Age of Antarctic Expedition. And all of the proceeds that we make will be going to the Antarctic Wildlife Fund. So just something to think about. If you're interested in this subject, you might be interested in the zine as well.
That is awesome. I'm looking it up right now on Twitter here.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely want to check that out. Looking forward to that. And yeah, for as little as I am familiar with the Arctic exploration, I'm probably even less familiar with the Antarctic side of things. So that's very exciting.
There is so much cool shipwreck related stuff that happens in the Antarctic. I'm just going to throw that out there. So maybe someday.
All right. I gave you a follow from the podcast account. There we are.
Thank you.
All right. So with that, I guess we will sign off here. We have a couple things coming up soon. We will, I promise, at some point drop our merch link. We mentioned it a while ago, and I haven't finalized the page for it yet. That'll be coming out soon.
Yeah, I'm anxiously waiting on that merch link.
We're just building up anticipation here. So we'll do that. And we'll have some more stuff out for you soon. And thanks again to Jess. And thanks to all of you who are listening. Until next time, take care.